going to start recording the event. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Grace, and I'm one of the co-founders of Product Buds, one of the fastest growing product management communities. If you've noticed, we're almost at 2,000 members in slightly over 2 months. So thank you all for your support and for continually coming back to our events. We're so thankful for all of you. So for those of you who don't know, we just launched a case studies initiative, which Darsh is going to talk more about. And this is a workshop that falls under that amazing initiative. And really, we have an amazing speaker, Charlene, today, who is going to walk you all through a product case study and be able to help you all develop your product sense further. So without further ado, I'll give the stage to Darsh and Charlene. Kick it off.
Thanks, Grace. So, hey everyone, first of all, happy August. Today is 1st of August, so kudos to all my fellow Leos. And yeah, so as Grace mentioned, we started case studies workshop about a month ago. And the aim of having a case studies initiative is to develop product sense. Like if you have deep dived into the PM field, you'd realize that a lot of things are about intuition. Like as a developer, designer, you can create things, you can learn courses, you can make stuff. But as a PM, it's all about judgment. You have to kind of be careful because some of the decisions you might make affect millions of people, or it might affect thousands of people. So the aim here is that how can we develop that judgment and inculcate naturally, so that even when you interview, like a lot of interview questions rely on your product sense or product judgment on how you answer it. So that's the goal of our case studies initiative. You can join our case studies channel on Slack, and we'll be posting weekly questions there as well. So for today's agenda, we have Charlene with us, who is an associate product manager at Google, and she's also the founder and head coach at LivingOS. And LivingOS is the non-profit that offers coaching and actionable guide to help you achieve more and get happier. And I'm sure Charlene can talk more in depth about this. Just a few notes about the agenda today. We'll be going over two of the most important things that you should keep in mind as a product manager. One is user empathy, and another is decision making, that how as a PM you should tackle crucial decisions. And some event etiquettes is we'll be having a Q&A at the end, and my teammates would be sending the link to Slido. You can go on slido.com and enter #buds to enter the Q&A platform, and you can just post your questions there. And one side note there is we won't be taking any questions regarding to Google recruiting or APM recruiting for today's event. We might do an event related to that soon, but for today we won't be doing that. So please refrain from asking questions related to Google recruiting. And all the views in this workshop are Charlene's personal view, and Charlene has been like super active. You can check out her LinkedIn, follow her on LinkedIn. And yeah, so let's begin our workshop, and handing it off to you, Charlene.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Darsh. And I'm really excited to share some of my 2 cents around, user empathy and decision making with you all. I think as a product manager and also as a startup founder, these are the most important skills PM or a founder should have. So I think honing into these principles, I really hope to help you get more out of the interview prep, and also no matter whether you want to be a PM or a founder in the future, I think these are like the key skills you should have. So just a quick note on the agenda. We will start from the bigger picture, and we will get straight into empathy muscle and decision-making muscle. With, I think, 40 minutes we have together, aside from the Q&A, I will try to give you as much as possible. So feel free to leave in the chat if you have any question, or leave your questions on Slido so we can get to it at the end. And just a little bit about me, in case anyone who don't know who I am. I graduated from Brown earlier, and I started my career with startups. So before I had my first engineering internship at Google in my freshman year, I had an education technology company that helps students in Brazil get a job, and that's like my first foray without knowing anything about business. So I got burnt, and that has been an interesting story I will tell another time. And then in 2017, I went to Google at shopping ads formats. And after Google, I left, went to a startup, been at there for 2 to 3 years, basically helping the healthcare company grow their medical imaging arm. So a lot of hats, and then I was a consultant for the CEO's office at Din Tai Fung. So I will tell you a little bit about the 2x2s, decision-making stuff. If you're a consultant, you probably are really familiar with that. But if you're not, I think those are some of the great tools to reduce your complex reasoning to something that's like really simple, easy to prioritize, and you can easily show that in your interviews. I was an APM. I'm still an APM at Google, but what I'm going to tell you today has nothing to do with the work. I lead the entire formats team for Google Play Ads, and I also do coaching for senior execs and also early career folks. So it's like a really wide range of audience, and I really love working with everyone. So we will talk about LivingOS at the end, but let's jump right into it. And I have a first question for y'all. So let me mute my Slack because it's like asking questions now. But I want to ask, like, could you think of a product you absolutely love or hate? I asked this question to Grace and Dar, so I will share their answer with you. But if you could take a moment and share some of your favorite and least favorite product in the chat, that would be really helpful. Oh, I love that the slides are visually pleasing. Thank you. OneNote. Wow, nice. Notion, yeah, we caught. I was just using Notability to make this slide, so that's nice. Okay, great. Any dislikes? A lot of likes here. LinkedIn, okay. Very interesting. Google Slides, Goodreads. I also dislike Goodreads. I don't know what is short, but yeah, okay. Very, very interesting answers. Keep them coming. And here are some of them, right? So some of the, I think Grace said that Notion is great, as some of you have said as well. And Dar said that Spotify is great. And take a moment to think, why are they great? Like, as you are writing them down, like, what makes you like them or not? I think for me, TikTok is awesome because it basically helps me express my creativity, like how I want to feel. And I feel really engaged and empowered when I share my media out there. Because like once in a while, you kind of will go viral without knowing why. It's really hard to replicate, but those surprises really click. And on the other hand, here's the bed frame my fiance and I purchased earlier last year. It really sucked because even though it looks pretty, it's extremely hard to assemble. So when you are moving into a new place and you have like all these positive feelings about you want to have a great bed and lie on it, and then you spend like hours on it without and almost like you can see it's like lifted, so it will almost break if you don't hold it up together at the same time. It's extremely heavy. So like those are some products that doesn't work that well. So yeah. Oh, I see some TikToks to left here. Interesting. You have to teach me how to be one. So I think now it's a great way to jump into empathy. So just look at what other people have, right? Like some people like OneNote, some people hate Amazon. Like look at the response and think of why. Because I think before I tell the reason, it's really great to form your own hypotheses. Otherwise, you will know that like what are the delta, like why am I saying that, and why did you think otherwise? Because I feel like only when you have hypotheses and being validated or invalidated could you really grow. So like just take a moment to think of like why do people like certain products and dislike other products. Okay. You can either write it or keep it to yourself. And I think the key question is, how are these products satisfying our core user needs, right? So say TikTok is about creativity. Say Notion is about productivity. It's a really powerful personalized management system, so we can get more done and be more structured in our thinking. What are some other examples here? Okay, Twitter. Yeah, I think Twitter is great because you can easily network with people with the best idea. No one really has to know how many followers you have. Like if the algorithm saw that you have a lot of engagement and likes, you will easily be serviced and go viral. Similar to TikTok as well. Here are some of the IKEA. Yeah, I think IKEA is a really interesting example because it's almost that certainty, right? Like, you know that you can go to IKEA and get everything you need for the very first day of your job, no matter where you are in the world, as long as there's IKEA. So just like keep thinking about like why people like and dislike, and the more hypotheses you form, the more you will learn from this workshop. Okay, so keep this question in mind and think about like how has they satisfied or upset. And then now I want to share my take on that with you. So I think no matter what you have written, they all could fall under 1 or 2 or even 5 of the following categories. So certainty is like IKEA, right? Like you can always go to that place expecting to know what you will get. And the other one is ATM. Like no one says ATM, but I think ATM is actually a really interesting example. Like no matter where you are in the world, as long as you have a card, debit card, credit card, wait, credit card? No, debit card. You can go to an ATM and get money out of it. And you know that it will always get money. It will always give you the money you requested as long as there's something in your bank. And if they fail the job, like there's always a customer service or a bank nearby to solve your problems. Like that's the certainty we love. The second one is sort of interesting, right? It's the entire opposite of the first one. It's uncertainty. And I think the reason why humans also love uncertainty is that we are sort of complicated. We want to know, like we have room and board every day. We have a safe haven, but we also want new things. Like if I'm telling you that you have to eat the same diet every single day, you probably will hate me. Like, why are you doing that to me? Like, why do I have to eat, kale in the morning, avocado for lunch, and then fast for dinner? Like if you keep doing this, it may be crazy. So that's like we need some variant, and that's like we have, even when people are on diet, we have like those cheat day to like be crazy and then like have those variety. And the third one is connection. So connection is the key to social product. If anyone works at Facebook, their mission is connecting everyone in the world, even though they may be doing it in a less optimal way, but like they're still connecting everyone, right? And some other one is like, I would argue like Instagram is doing that pretty well, WhatsApp, all the Facebook portfolio has now the social aspect, which is the connection part. And the fourth one is personal growth. This one is similar to, so these 5 are similar to the Maslow's hierarchy, but not exactly similar, because I think I translate that into a product sense. So when I say growth, it's almost like knowledge, like using Notion to organize your knowledge, using masterclass to watch interesting instructors teaching cool stuff, watching YouTube for learning how to cook, learning how to cut your hair for a boyfriend during the quarantine, that kind of stuff. And the last one is contribution. That one is more of a like self-actualization, Oprah-ish aspect, but I think it's super important. It's why people join nonprofit, why people join Army, even though they may seem like really hard, doesn't pay that well as a corporate job, but that really gives people that sense of fulfillment, right? That might be why people volunteer for product bots, and that's why people volunteer for COVID and that kind of stuff. So I want you to just take a moment here and look at either what you have written down or what other people have written down and write the product with the parentheses of like what core human needs have they satisfied or unsatisfied if they are being disliked. So just like drop your observation in the chat and I will see how that is. And if you disagree with me, like tell me now. I want to learn and see whether these core human needs encapsulate all the product ideas you have shared so far. Yeah, OneNote because of certainty. It's really interesting. So I think the certainty part, I want to elaborate that a little bit. If you're working on a B2B product, you don't need a flashy new cool tech. You just need a guarantee that no matter what happens, no matter any cybersecurity attacks, like hit your server, your data will be there and your things wouldn't be deleted. So that's actually the key distinction between B2B and B2C product. B2C, well, if your data is like lost, maybe it's bad, but like we have some better feature to serve you. But if you're enterprise, if your data is lost, like like it's crazy. Like how could they how do they explain that to their customer, right? So I think that also distinguishes some of the key industry segments there. Yeah, I like how Zoom is so versatile that, like they were just a video communication meeting app, and now they're almost like this brand that brings people together, have beautiful filter to like, let us don't have to do makeup, and then we can also easily jump on one with all of you now. So yeah, so keep them coming and also save them. And I don't know whether this chat will be saved, but like save them on your end, because I think as you go by, one of the key exercises I share with my LivingOS students is that if you want to build your product sense, you should always be mindful of the product you're using and why they suck or not suck. Because every single experience you had is a data point, is like a learning opportunity, if you will, to make you become a product to make you have a better product sense. So if you could just like keep a product journal and try 3-5 new apps every day and write down your hypotheses about like why did you download it at first? How did you feel during the time? And looking back, how was your hypothesis change and what has they changed? If you could keep forming these hypotheses, you could slowly build your product sense. Even when you see a new product in the interview, people will be like, okay, so tell me more about why this product sucks or works. And you can easily say, well, because it satisfies 1, 2, 3 human needs, and you have a story, because like when you're sharing that with your family, you feel really loved. So I feel like if you could start building that portfolio, the product journal, evoking stories in your daily life, and just like writing down those moments and hypotheses, that could really help your interview so far. Okay, I love people said Robinhood is growth, because this is Shaya, like this is such an awesome framing for Robinhood. You should be their marketer. So yeah, I think I want to tell you more about why should we start with needs. As a PM or aspiring PM, you probably have like a good sense of like the critical user journey. You know the terminology of how users come to an app, but 99% of the users don't know that, right? They don't have the terminology. They don't know the framework. They just have feelings. Like we humans have feelings, and we like and dislike certain things, but we don't know why. So I think the key, if you want to be a really good PM with key user insights, you have to explain the why. And the reason, and the way to get to the why is to know the principles, right? So we have like lizard brain and reptile brain, but like the TLDR is we learn education and logic as we grow up. But the underlying operating system in our brain are all feelings. Like we feel happy, we feel angry, like we feel frustrated, fear of something. And those are the feelings that no matter how old or how wise we get, we couldn't reject them. Otherwise, we will be repressing them, and it will have like some other consequences down the road. So that's why I think feelings are so important. And if you want to understand users, you almost have to default to, okay, so like this is the feature we want to launch, this is the project we want to launch, what are the feelings user will get? I can share one really concrete example. So I've worked on a product that helps make communication better. And we have a feature that would like make, we will like solve a key pain points to let user have less user flow and less like, exceptions to be cached. But when we want to launch the product, we just didn't get through the final stage, because the director at the time told us that, hey, if you're launching this feature and a tiny percentage of user will lose access to their past voicemail, that will be a huge problem. And anyone know why? Like, tell me why in the chat. Like, why would a tiny loss of voicemail be a huge launch blocker? Given that it's well scoped, engineers have like worked on it, prioritized, it's in the OKR, but it couldn't be launched. Like, what do you think is the reason why we couldn't launch that feature? It may be a hard question, but just like say anything here. I'm curious about like if anyone get it. I feel like I would. Voicemail is a must-have. Yeah, but like I think loss of user. Yeah. What else? I think loss of user trust is a key. Is one direction. Uncertainty, loss of habit. Okay, very interesting. Voices are familiar. Yeah, so I think many of the answers have touched upon the directions I want to go to accessibility. I like how well-rounded you all are, like accessible. That's awesome. FaceTime audio. Okay, so like user frustration. Okay, so keep a copy of that, and I'll tell you what has happened here. So what has happened is that we have 2 product managers working on that feature. It's extremely high visibility because the key pain point we are trying to solve could onboard a lot more users. But we couldn't launch it because if the voicemails were given by your grandparents who have unfortunately passed away, that may be the only record you have of them. And we don't know how often people listen to the voicemails, right? We don't know whether you could export it or save a copy, but if we just delete it and then ignore that tiny 0.1% of the user and they lost the final contact with their loved ones, that would be a huge blow on the PR, the branding, and all that. So yes, user trust, yes, certainty, but also that story just basically said, yeah, no one has any arguments against that. Like, yes, we shouldn't launch it. So, period. And you see, that's not even a data point. We didn't pull data. We didn't look at the metrics. We didn't evaluate the ROI. It's just a key story that we knew we couldn't do because our branding is there and we couldn't suffer the blow of, taking away the final piece of contact between 2 beloved human beings in the past. So I think that's an example that really, made me rethink how user empathy is, because it's deeply intuitive, and I don't think I could learn it from any book or any framework. But I think the director who came up with that is just like a really great empathizer, if there is such a word, with user. Like he could always identify with no matter who the user is, young or old, and he could always find out the pain points that would make the user extremely happy or extremely upset. So I think as a aspiring PM, as a product bots, try to come up with those moments, right? Like try to think about people who are not like you. Like how would they think? One of the key hypothesis product PM interviews want to test is, could you identify with someone who is extremely different as you? Like, if you grew up in the States, like, could you know how people say in Malaysia think, like how people in Japan think? Like, could you put yourself in a different shoe and be able to, rationalize debate from their viewpoint? Yeah, so yeah, there is someone lost their voicemail from your mom. Yeah, that's a big deal. So now that you know, it's really important. And just to, recap, if you just want to have 2 questions to take away from the empathy section, know that, hey, what is your need? Always ask your user need. There are 5 ways for you to attach to. Just pick a few of them. And then the second one is, how can we address the need? As a PM, as a product developer, how could you create a product or feature that address the core human needs? And I don't know if we have time for this, but if you could ask this in a Slido, or we will go to this later. But there are many, many more layers about empathy, right? I give you the basic, and then there's more about how could you make your product so natural that everyone will just use it. Like think about Facebook, or think about WeChat. Like their founders weren't those amazing salesperson that could easily give you a slideshow and then saying that here are the top 10 reasons you should use Facebook. They're a little bit social awkward. They don't know how to pitch perfectly, but they basically would just patiently watch how users interact with their product, and they can look at the data and design the best feature for them. So that's how following user flow is. It's about being a natural observant, and you just listen. You don't question. It's almost like a passive way of growing and developing a product, but that's one of the key empathy skills that I talk about in LivingOS. The other one is don't make me think. It's a book. but it's also about a key design principle about the best design, the best product shouldn't make you think. You shouldn't look at the button and say, should I click this? If you're asking that question, that's not a good product. And the third one is subconscious. Subconscious is a key topic in just like behavioral theory and just PM in general, because it basically makes up of 70% of our decision, right? So how could we know the subconscious, the stereotypes of human, and how could we leverage that to flip it aside or serve it? It's really key for a new product. Okay, so now we will jump to decision making. If you have any questions, you could I would take 1 or 2 for the empathy section, but if not, I will keep going. Or you can ask in Slido. Okay, so just a precursor for decision making. I will go through the interview lens about how decision making helps your PM interview, but I would also talk about how it will help you in life. Why are you here? You're probably looking for getting into PM, getting to a product offer, right? So career is probably one of your priorities in your life, but maybe there's something more. So we will talk about that later. If you remember, the key question for empathy is how could we serve the user needs? And I want to lead you, the key question for decision making is how could we make this problem non-existent? So the key about decision making is actually not about prioritization or solving the problem. It's actually invalidating the need to solve that problem. So if you could do that, you can say no to the things that are not important to you, and then you can focus on things that are really key to your life. So some of the key case study question is, how could I prioritize feature X? How could I sunset product Y? I think there's a calendar I really liked. I think it's called, what's that? I forgot, but Microsoft acquired them and they sunsetted it, which made me really, really sad. That's the calendar app I think I've ever loved, but that's a side note there. And the third one is how could we launch Project Z? So I would challenge you, if you're someone who is doing mock interview, look at the question and extrapolate the principle from it. Because I would say maybe 80% of the decision-making question could fall into either one of these. Or maybe there's more about M&A, merger acquisition strategy, but try to reduce that to the principle, and we can talk about how to use these skills. So here's the 2x2. So that's what I promised you, one of the 2x2 I created. It's how I make decisions for life, and also product and launches, right? I use 2 metrics. One is this thing significant? And the other one is this thing reversible? So disclaimer, it may not apply to everything, but it applies to how could you work on what should you do right now, and how could you launch product X. So I'm just going to explain that in detail. Reversible means if you do this, you could easily undo it. So what are reversible? Posting something online is reversible, sort of, because you can edit it if you're not on Twitter. And firing someone is not reversible because you have, tell everyone about that. You have almost have that hard conversation. It's really hard to regain the trust about the people. And significant and insignificant. So that'll be rather straightforward, right? So is this thing going to move your metric to your goal? Is this thing going to increase a huge percentage of your revenue? Or is it just a low-hanging fruit that is easily done but doesn't move the needle any forward? And with that, there are 2 actions here. If it is reversible and insignificant, don't think, just do it. Because you probably could redo it anyways, and it's not going to cost you a lot. So do it as soon as possible, right? It could be, should I buy book X? Buying a book is just not that, it's not that big of a decision. So just buy it, and then you can always refund it if you really hate it, or if you feel like you need it later down the road. And the A lab is as late as possible. It's almost should I get married with this person? Should I buy this house? Should I maybe leave this job if you're in a long-term full-time job? Those are some of the significant and irreversible decisions you want to really sleep on it, and then take time to think through every single edge cases. Though I would say try to use the significant factor to prioritize it, because you don't want to wait too long, otherwise you're going to miss out. And everything has a deadline. You may say that, well, take marriage for example, I could be like single forever, but probably you want to, like settle or like around before 40 or 30, right? Like think of the virtual deadline for yourself, otherwise you could really go with this and be too late and regret it. I don't want to enforce that on you. And the other things I didn't write on this graph is in the section of reversible and significant, try to de-risk it, because it is important enough for you to look at it, but you want to make it, you want to do it ASAP, but also you don't want to mess it up. So try to find ways to de-risk it and make it less risky, and then you can move it to one of the ASAP or ALAP. So always try to move things into one of the two categories. If you find yourself in between, you should get more information to validate and assign a label for them too. Like those are the actions you should take. If you don't have those labels, you're basically having a goal without a deadline, which is probably mean you're never going to do it anyway. So try to assign the actions here. Okay, and similar to empathy, let's see the time. Okay, 34. We're good on time. So there are a few of the principles I go into like really deep in the LivingOS. One is finding the lead domino, right? Like once you know the prioritization, what are some of the key metrics you want to optimize? If you're running an ads product, it's probably revenue, long-term value with trust, with user and advertiser, or like some other metric. And then the second one is knowing when to decide. So I don't know about you, but like I have, even though I would say I'm sort of impatient, I still act too slow many times. So it's really important to enforce and knowing how to balance like when to act and when to wait. And this is like a threshold. It's almost like a 30%, 70% problem, but like we'll talk about that later. And the third one is framing the problem well. That's, I would say, once you know how to find the root problem with what I said earlier, the next most important and challenging thing is how to frame the problem well. Framing is something that would be increasingly important as you go on with your career, because if you want to get more resources from the senior execs, you're trying to convince that why is this more important than 6 other projects they're overseeing, right? You're trying to compete with all the resources. So it's almost like storytelling. How could you frame it in a way that satisfies their core needs, the company's OKR, the organization, the product area's OKR, and also the thing your team and yourself care most about. So framing is a monster on its own. So I would love to cover it, but I don't think I have the time today. So regarding decision making, are there any questions? Because I think these are rather high level, and it's kind of hard to like to just like walk through. But if there's any question, I can try to address it now. So if not, I will like try to go back. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I would share that first. So Kara asked, can I give an example of a time you acted too late? It's actually a really, so there are many times. And I think one of them is knowing that I like a startup. I think when you know you're an entrepreneur, you will always think that you're too late to start a company. Because I think in the past, I used to have a lot of excuses. I was like, oh, I don't have a co-founder, so I couldn't start a company. I would say I'm not good enough. I have to learn more. And I think learning more has always been the excuses I told myself. Like, I was like, oh, I'm just learning, like, take it easy. I'm not going to start it today. But I realized that the longer the time gets, and the more I like, I wouldn't say trap myself. I would say the longer I spend in corporate, I just realized that it's not really who I am and who I love. I think the core part about me is that I love to create value. I love to be extremely transparent and true about who I am. And I think it's one of the unique elements that make it essential that I need to start a company someday. And that's why I started LivingOS, starting to write every day back in March. And that's why I also spent a lot of time coaching people on the side. So yeah. And I think there's a way to balance them, right? When you're doing it, it doesn't mean you couldn't think about it. The way I started LivingOS is that I started writing one article every day. So I'm doing things, but I'm also thinking about it, because like if I don't think, I couldn't write. So it's almost this like unique combination. And I also saw that skill worked really well. One of my friends, Valentine, he started his company. So his story is cool. He graduated from Brown 2 years earlier than I am. Or 2 years, I forgot. But he basically has no plan. He knows he wants to do a company. He just like writes every day. He has like plan to learn and then like iterate, and then he's basically learning in public. And I think around a year later, after he graduates, he finally clicked with one of his good friends back in the day, and then founded the company, which was originally open but now monthly. And I think they're doing just extremely well. Like in their very first year, they easily broke $1 million revenue, and they are just like on a crazy exponential track now. And that's a very good example of like knowing what he wants and doing it without knowing exactly what he wants, right? Like he knows he loves to start a company, but he doesn't know what exactly that is. He knows he loves learning, so he writes. And then as he writes and then iterates and then like get feedback, he eventually stumbles upon what he loves now. So yeah. Got it. So any other question, feel free to drop. And I just want to share, like take a step back, right? Before this workshop started, I told Darsh that I've actually never done any mock interviews when I prepare for my PM offer. And the reason is, I think it's not really, when you're trying to apply to be a PM, going through the process, it's not really about how great or how familiar you are with the framework. Because if you're extremely familiar, you will sound like a robot. Like you will just be one of the other applicants who could remember the things, and then you will be the same. Like the best thing you could get is to be the same as someone else who prepared as much as you did. And I knew I don't want to be one of them, right? So I basically took a step back and looked at the principles. So what are the key user principles? What are the key PM principles? Like what do they know? What are the good PMs good at? So I actually spent a lot of time looking at biographies. Like how did Steve Jobs, what did he learn before he started Apple? What did he learn when he was just in college? Like what are the things people do before they become who they are? And that's like what I focus on, right? So that's how I came upon, okay, so know users really well, know the psychology, know the subconscious, and do all that. And decision making is also one of them. Like there, as you have seen earlier, there's like launching, many different aspects, and decision making is one of the key things. And that's why I want to bring it upon. Like if you're currently optimizing for career, that is great. But don't forget, there are also so many other things in your life. There's like friends, fun, money time, as you can see, like yourself, your body, family, home. And that's what I always want to hone in on. Like, yes, career is one, but also pick one or two other categories. So you won't be blindsided when career is not 100% serving your dream. Like, you're way more than what you're doing at work. You're who you are, and try to find more of yourself, try to be more of yourself. And that's what I really want to do with LivingOS. Okay, so I will get to the question, but I just want to give you the full roadmap. So in June, or 2 months ago, I went to share the entire principles I have for PM offer. It's in detail, in depth for the empathy part, decision-making part, and many others. And then July, we talk about master social skills, because I know that for me, I'm like introverted, so it's really hard to get in touch with other people. Parties or group communication, especially remotely on Zoom. So like I talk about strategies there. And then August is almost about productivity. So if people like have seen my YouTube, like I'm a big Notion fan. I write about like how I optimize my entire day. So more of that in August. And then September is what I have said. Like there is so much more in your life, and I want to help you design your entire life. So that's that. And LivingOS University is, if you use that link, you will see that. And then if you want to stay in touch, look at my Substack. It's weekly, free, and I talk about book recommendation, life planning, and many other new updates. And you can, if you want to stay in touch, that's the best way to do so. And then LivingOS, livingos.-ic, you can see the LivingOS University. And that's it. I will now take a few questions. I think Slido may have more, but I will look at the most recent one from Shreya's here. What was the question on your interviews that really threw you off? How did you answer it? Well, there are many questions, right? Since I'm not that well prepared, I didn't like know what they're going to ask. So I think one of the questions I also shared in my PM newsletter is, could you teach me something in 5 minutes? And I don't know why, but when I got that question, I was asked like I brought my golf club because I was going to play golf during that interview. And then I just looked at it and I was like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to play golf. And bear in mind, it's a virtual interview. I've never seen that person, know that person's background. Maybe he's a professional golf player. I have no idea. And I'm going to teach him something that is really hard to understand through words. So I basically just like tell him the principle of playing golf, like how could you play it? And then I think he saw a lot of passion. Like I just showed a bunch of passion when I was going through that tutorial. And then he's just like, I don't even know he knows what I'm talking about, but I think he's just like really intrigued by how passionate I am about the thing. So yeah, that's that. And looking back, I would teach him how to speak Mandarin or Cantonese. I wouldn't teach him how to play golf because like I could easily teach him something that's like measurable. He could like feel good after talking about it, and then we can have a successful interview there. Okay, so there's that. And there's another question: was there ever an incident where you have gone with intuition rather than data while making any critical decision? Do you mean in life or at work? So I think the voicemail example is a key intuition one. Some of the other one are, okay, let me just like be really specific here. If you're working at a company that has a big advertising arm, you could always go there and see what are some of the negative launches. Like what are some of the launches that have negative revenue, right? Because those cases are obviously not justified by metric, because like if you're justified by metric, you wouldn't launch a negative revenue impacting. So that means that there is some of the user intuition things there. Maybe that's better for user value that's like couldn't be measured by CTR or impression, and that's why they launched the product. So that's just a good way to go. And I'm going to ask Darsh or Grace, should I look at Slido or Zoom chat?
Yeah, sure.
For the coming questions.
So thanks a lot. I really enjoyed your presentation, and you might have seen in the comments, people really like your slide deck. So thank you for putting in the effort to kind of create that. I hope we could share it with the community later on. But yeah, for the rest of the session, we'll be taking questions from Slido and using popular vote feature. So feel free to go at slido.com, put in #buds and post your questions there. And I would highly recommend taking this opportunity because you might have guessed Charlene is really busy with like her job and like her startup. So this is a great chance to ask her questions. So I would definitely use that.
Yeah.
So moving on, Charlene, our first question is, how do you practice user empathy when you don't have time or resources to do any user research, such as during mock interviews? Because essentially you are required to give an answer, I guess, but not really have the time to go and talk to users or understand their perspective, but maybe do a guess. So how would you tackle that?
Yeah, so I think the pre-work actually comes before the mock interview, right? Because like you only have 15 minutes, you probably couldn't just be your grandma during that. So I would say like, talk to other people, that diversify your social circle, like talk to people, watch the TVs that you don't normally watch, and try to understand how people that are unlike you think. Like right now, like tonight, or even during lunch, could you just find an example of like a Netflix show that you probably wouldn't watch and try to understand why would people watch it? Like Tiger King, I don't know, why do people like it? And use those examples to build up your intuition, and the more diverse, the more different, the better. And I think during if you're asking me some of the impromptu answer, I would say, this might be like kind of cheating, but try to think of a user that the interviewer also wouldn't know, right? So he wouldn't say that you're wrong. So maybe just like find, if they're like working in the Valley, probably they don't know people from, they probably wouldn't know people from Okinawa, Japan. So try to say, okay, I know like this Okinawa woman from Japan, she thinks this way. And they'll be like, wow, that's a cool user insight from, your trip. So tell me more. So yeah, so just like leverage the fact that what you know, and also leverage the fact that what they don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree on this. I actually received a feedback from one of my mentors that when somebody asks you like a question, like tell me about your favorite product, it may not be a good idea to talk about a product for which they are a product manager. So, like
Yeah.
if you
No.
interview at Google or Facebook, don't talk about products for them because they probably know them better than you. So that's a great example.
Yeah.
So
Only do
moving
that when
on.
you have a thesis. Like if you have done a
Hmm.
really big thesis on it. Otherwise, don't try to impress them with that.
Yeah, exactly. So our next question is, how do you? Sorry, I think that was just skipped. Yeah, what do you use to? Henrika, can we go to the top?
This is the top.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you balance between a tight timeline and including features for an MVP? Which features do you decide to keep, or is there any other way around this?
Yeah. So I actually plan to have this slide. Thanks for asking that question, first of all. I think, looking at OKR, because if you're working at a bigger company, even startups, you probably have your own OKR, your team's OKR, your org's OKR, and you have the pressure to deliver, right? So absolutely just use that to prioritize. And especially if you're, one of the PMs working on it, there's really no better way to convince people since that's already on their job description and their way to get promotion. Um, and if you're saying that, oh, even in the OKRs you want to prioritize, try to batch things. Like, right, try to look at the goals, and maybe if you couldn't deliver on all the key results, try to see what are some of the shortcuts you can get to the goal. Because the key is really not to, like, things change, right? There, things deprecated, review doesn't pass. So try to see how could you tell a story that shows, well, this is the best way to achieve the goal. And maybe that's not the way you had planned 3 months ago. Maybe something has changed, like COVID came, like whatever, like US decided to ban TikTok, those kind of things. And be aware of that. And you should always, socialize this idea not with yourself and your team, but also with your, I would say, key partner and also directors, right? Because they probably don't have the full context you have. They probably don't know the full challenges you're facing. So try to let them decide. Like you're not the only PM on your team, I suppose. So try to get more people in, and the earlier you could get them in, the earlier they will speak for your idea because they feel like they're a part of it, right? They're also your sponsor, and then you can get it passed through the hurdles you have.
Yeah, that perfectly makes sense. Like I've also heard people saying that a lot of times in product management, it's about influencing others without having the power to do so. So you are not controlling them; they are not responsible to you. But how do you involve and influence them so that they feel that they want to help you out or they want to advocate for your product? That's a great input. So our
Building,
next question,
yeah,
yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
follow up. Building an influence graph is really important, right? There are many archetypes of like what people are. Are they your enemy, sponsor? Hopefully they're not your enemy. And try to like give them a label. This is not to like label people, but like try to give them a label so you could easily understand who you're speaking to. Because you want to have a different message based on the role they are. And the best way is to be clear about that with yourself. Their role can change, of course, but try to have an influence graph, and like the very inner circle is like the most trusted TL, PM directors you have. The other circle is like people who may have influenced their decision, but they probably aren't the most explicit approvals. And then try to enlarge that circle like one graph at a time, right? And then that's how you influence up.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Actually, I haven't heard about this before. And again, if you all like Charlene's responses, feel free to follow her on LinkedIn and send hashtag Charlene in the chat. Let's see if you guys like this workshop.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, so moving on, our next question is what would you say is the one most important factor that comes into decision making for a product or product features?
Yeah, so know your North Star metric. I also wanted to include this in the slide, but I decided not to because I didn't know what it'll be confusing or not. So what's North Star? Usually you will have a triangle, right? Like one angle is the user, one angle is the revenue plus what revenue, and the other one is your team. So how could you find a metric that optimize them in a way that wouldn't sacrifice either one over the other? So one example is that we use long-term value instead of like revenue, because long-term value also includes user trust, our own revenue, and the team and our contribution. So try to find the North Star metric and use that to guide your decision, right? And you want to make sure the North Star metric is agreed upon by all the stakeholders. Otherwise, they will question your metric, and you couldn't really do anything if people are questioning your basic assumption about how things should be.
Definitely. And one kind of follow-up question to that, I'm just curious about this. Like, how do you define the long-term value of a product or product feature? Like, do you have any idea so that if somebody asks you this question in an interview or something, like you may not have the data, but you can tell like what maybe your approach to do that.
Yeah. So I think depends on how many history, like how large the company is and what kind of metrics they have, right? But I think some of the easier one is if you're looking at like the entire page and you're trying to have ads on it, the easier is like click through rate, like how many ads are being clicked. But the other one is the entire whole page metric, right? Like how are the organic items being interacted with? Like how do people like play with things, with having a new ad sacrifice their interact with other feature. And I think looking the entire full page experience or the entire full app experience could help you balance out the single fixation on revenue and advertisements.
Yeah, perfect. And that's also a pointer to our audience. Like when you're preparing for like mock interviews, or like even in general your products, it's important to define like a strategy behind your product. Like it's not just about the design or just about how which users you're tackling. It's also important to think like strategically how you'll go about your product. So definitely that's a good point. So our next question is, what would you use to make this presentation, and what are some ways you go decide what new products to use for? Example, from not knowing about Notion to now relying on it.
Wait, so when you say what would you use to make this do you mean exactly like what exact tool I use?
I'm not sure since the question is anonymous. If we have like the question, whoever asked this question on the call, feel
Someone
free
say
to
yes.
unmute yourself and elaborate.
Someone say yes. So I'm just assuming that that's the yes. Okay, so I use
Okay.
Canva to make this presentation. So Canva is like great for any assets, either static or active. So yeah, and also they have a bunch of free version, but I use the paid because I want a feel of the transparent background and that kind of stuff. What are some ways I go decide what new products to use? So you probably would be surprised. I actually don't use that many new products. I started to use Notion in 2018 when I was a sophomore, right? And since I used that through my entire college, I basically just became like a sort of like a self-proclaimed expert on Notion. So the reason I don't use that many new products is that I don't want to suffer from the shiny object syndrome, which is whenever something new comes out, I will become like, the number one loyal user. And then once the fad goes away, I just become bored with it. So I don't use Hey.com. I don't use Superhuman. There are like many new products I don't use, but I think I try to minimize the number of products I use and try to get the most out of the ones I use. And so that's why if I choose the product, I will become an extremely heavy user. Like I use Canva to create slides. Like people don't use it to create slides. So I think that's a good example.
Definitely, and the choice thing is too real. Like when you have too many, there is like psychological evidence. When you have too many choices to choose from, you actually get more like confused that what should I do. So that is also one of the points why in interviews or like in product questions we try to enumerate to like top 3 points. If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, go with 3 because humans are wired to remember 3 points.
Exactly. So I think we answered this question, Henrika, about the timeline. Moving on to the next question. If you are given 3 tasks but can only complete 2, how would you navigate that decision?
Yeah, so try to communicate any delay and under delivery early on. Not to the entire team, of course, but try to share that with your trusted team member who would also will have to take the blame for that, because you don't want to have surprises. People hate surprises. And maybe when you tell them, they will find some solutions for you. So like, don't try to solve it on your own, because obviously this is not just on you, right? You're a PM, you have an entire team to work with you. So convey that urgency early on. And then that also builds trust. Like, vulnerability builds trust. And the other thing is that I will challenge you to, make more out of that, because very rarely you couldn't find any overlapping between a couple products. So how could you use the two to get more out of the two? Like, how could those outcomes try to maybe accomplish 50%, 15% of the third task? And then when you have this urgency updates, you could also have a plan to say, this is how you're going to mitigate it. Because people, like, yeah, we hate surprises, but we also hate people who bring problems and no solutions. We want to see solutions, and even though it's a rough draft, like, try to share, at least you have tried and think, and then we can work from there.
Definitely. And with the interest in time, this would be our last question. It's 2:59 p.m. EST here. So this question is like, tell me about a decision you regret and one thing you want to change about it. But I think it would be great if we could modify this for our audience. I think an alternate question I would ask is, if you had one advice for yourself 2 or 3 years back, before you like entered your product journey and started out in it, and were like an aspiring PM or just new to product, and there is one thing you could change or you would advise everybody on the call, what would that be?
Yeah, I will start to learn more about human psychology, because human is like the most complex object, animal, like species in the world, right? And there's really no limit on how you can learn. I started to learn them from history books, like studying all the political science in college, but it's never enough. And you'll always be surprised by like the diversity and people from different backgrounds you see. And if you are working with people with a really diverse team, I recommend a book called Kiss, Ball, and Shake Hands. It basically tell you like they have like a bunch of different countries, and they will tell like the things to say to them, the things that are like red flags, and how to do best, like what time is the best time to work with them, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would recommend you to like invest more time in learning about the people, because eventually people are the ones who make you successful, right? Like they may be mentors, sponsors, whoever, and they were also the ones who are going to make you miserable. So try to learn about that early on.
Yeah, I love the point that you said they are also going to be the ones make your life more miserable, because that is absolutely true. Well, we are at time, and everybody in the chat, put down hashtag Charlene once again if you loved this workshop. And it has been amazing. Like, I really like the content, Charlene, personally. It was fun to know about user empathy and decision making, and a lot of points I got that were new to me personally. Like, one thing that you mentioned about labeling the members you are working with, that's a great point. And to top it off, everybody, if you liked Charlene's content, feel free to follow her on LinkedIn. Check out her company, LivingOS. That is also a great resource. And again, if you like the content, you can post about the event on LinkedIn. Feel free to tag Charlene, me, the Product Buds team, and other team members, and we'll interact with your content, try to develop your personal brand. And before I end, any last comments, Charlene, for our Product Buds community?
Yeah, so I would say, like, you want to be a PM, and I think that's awesome, and you're already like being involved even on weekends. But at the same time, don't try to miss out on what you can learn on your current job, because PM is such a diverse role that whatever you bring to the table is a valuable experience, right? So try to think about, after your internship, after your first job, what story do you want to tell to your next employer? And write it down. And then looking back, how could you add the details that your story doesn't have yet? Like, how would you be able to like have that extra conversation, launch that extra feature, so that you could tell the story that you really hope to tell your next employer?
Definitely agree with that. Like I did an internship few years back, and I was like, this is not going to help me anytime. But soon I realized that product management is a lot about how you become a storyteller, especially in interviews, because they'll have like 10 people who can like mug up a framework and go about that. But what is your unique perspective? And I think that is one of the great points you need to keep in mind, just not for the interviews but also when you're working as a product manager.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So Grace, we are at time. You have any last comments, and then we can end it off.
Nope, I don't have any last comments. Thank you all so much for coming in to listen to Charlene and her wonderful presentation. Thank you, Charlene, for presenting to us today, and looking forward to seeing all of you in the Product Bud Slack. If you are not currently in it, all you need to do is go to the link that one of my team members will post in the chat to join the Product Buds community. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your Saturday.
Thanks, everyone.
Exactly. And give a shout out to Charlene and Product Bus Case Studies channel. So have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll be ending the call. So see you guys soon. Thank you,
Take
Charlene.
care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.